What happens when one of Christianity's most prominent online apologists just so happens to also be one of its most controversial figures? In this video, I will be discussing the story of Sam Shamoun. And Sam Shamoun, while he is highly effective at facilitating the conversion from Islam to Christianity for some Muslims, is also often criticized by some Christians as being overly hostile and aggressive in his approach. To foreshadow the agenda for this video, we will first be talking about how Sam is the son of Iraqi immigrants. While they are Assyrian ethnically, but they lived in Iraq and they moved to America, and how this experience might have shaped Sam into the apologist that he is today. We will then go on to talk about how Sam briefly dabbled with Islam and was considering whether or not it was the truth as a late teenager. After that, we will discuss how Sam, despite having no formal education, he doesn't even have a high school diploma as a matter of fact. He only has a GED, but yet he is capable and he excels at debating people who are PhD scholars. We will then talk about the tension with Sam Shamoun and the contrast of some people sometimes calling him a brilliant apologist, while at other times people call him mentally unstable. Lastly, we will be discussing Sam's journey through multiple Christian denominations and what that means for the kind of person and apologist that he is. And if you don't know what an apologist is someone who defends their faith. Now, there's also the topic of polemics, which is someone who is really highlighting the deficiencies in other denominations and other faiths. And we will be using the words apologetics and polemics frequently for the rest of this video. And the story is important. The story about Sam is important because not only does it help us learn about the personal journey of Sam Shamoun, but what it also does is it gives us insight into modern religious discourse online and the way that discourse happens around religion on the internet and how that's evolved throughout the years and what the implications of that are. It also helps us answer the question of what makes effective apologetics and evangelism. What is it about Sam's approach or the approach of others that makes evangelism productive versus unproductive? Lastly, examining the story of Sam Shamoun helps us in exploring the tension between being apologetic, ruthlessly apologetic about the truth of what we believe, combined with the perceived tension of charity and being kind in debate and in discussion. And so it all starts for Sam with the Assyrian Church of the East. Sam was baptized into the Assyrian Church of the East. This was the church of his ancestors. And this church, the Assyrian Church of the East, is one of the very ancient churches. As a matter of fact, it was the first church to actually break off from the rest of mainline Christianity back in 431 AD. There was a Council of Ephesus, and there were some people who disagreed with the Council of Ephesus, and so they splintered off from the rest of Christianity, and they are now referred to as the Assyrian Church of the East. And his ancestry is from this church. And being a church with Middle Eastern roots and having his parents be Assyrian immigrants who immigrated from Iraq. So they were Assyrian by ethnicity, but they lived in Iraq. They immigrated to America. And during that time that his parents immigrated, there was a lot of persecution in Iraq towards Christians. And so this was something that his parents and many of his ancestors in previous generations had to endure, since persecution of Christianity is rather common and frequent throughout the millennia in the Middle East. And so Sam's background, being Assyrian and coming from the Assyrian Church of the East and having Assyrian parents from Iraq really gives him a unique perspective on Islam, and it gives him a unique perspective on ancient Christianity. And Sam Shamoun tells the story of when he was 6.5 years old, how he met an elderly lady who was a Catholic. And she was Lebanese and Assyrian ethnically. And this woman taught him a prayer known as the Ava Maria. And Sam said that this had a profound impact on his spiritual journey. And he said that this elderly lady never stopped praying for him. This Catholic lady never stopped praying for him. And he goes on to say that he didn't really appreciate that, and he didn't understand the dignity of this elderly Catholic Lebanese Assyrian lady, because he says his Protestantism kind of blinded him from glorifying, or at least dignifying, rather, this lady. And it was this experience he had with this elderly lady that serves to foreshadow the early Catholic influence that existed in Sam Shamoun's life, and how this experience with this elderly Catholic lady came full circle for him many decades later. And it also goes to show the power that exists in your earliest experiences with spirituality and God as a child. And from there, Sam Shamoun also learned about the intercession of saints. He learned about communion of saints from a Catholic lens. And by the time he was a little bit older, he came across a 15-year-old Muslim boy. And this Muslim boy asked Sam Shamoun if he could ask him a few questions about Jesus, about God, and about the Trinity. And Sam Shamoun said, sure. And so this boy asked his questions. Sam answered. This happened a few times. And eventually what happened was this young Muslim boy declared his belief in Jesus as God. And he converted from Islam to Christianity. And this was Sam Shamoun's first real experience with facilitating the conversion of a Muslim to Christianity. And it foreshadows the rest of his experience as an apologist that would occur in his adulthood. And a few years after this happened, Sam Shamoun got a bit more exposure to Islam, which he didn't have too much exposure with before. And because of this exposure, he started reading the Quran, and he started listening to Malcolm X, who was a Muslim political activist. And after doing this, Sam Shamoun started becoming convinced that Islam was true. He said that he was once convinced for a brief period that Islam was actually the truth. And this didn't last very long. And this exposure helped him set himself up as the apologist he is today, because he has a lot of personal experience with the Quran. And it wasn't only an intellectual experience. He was genuinely seeking, or he at least appeared to be genuinely seeking, what is true. The only reason I say it that way is because we never really know what's in a person's heart. And I can only really talk about the stories that Sam himself has told. And this would serve to explain why his debates can feel so personal and intense sometimes, because for him it is personal. He does have this past, he does have this experience, not only with his heritage and his ancestry and his family, but also with his own journey in exploring different faiths and religions. And so Sam's development really went from being a seeker to a bit of a skeptic to now who he is today, which is a staunch defender of ancient Christianity. And so when Sam started doing apologetics, he started with this website called answeringislam.com, and he would blog on answeringislam.com. And he would really talk about two main categories of topics. The first category would be Christology and topics relating to Jesus Christ. He would write about, for example, the incarnation of Jesus Christ and the deity of Christ and his divine attributes and his divine kingship and the relationship between Jesus Christ and the Father. And the second broad category he would talk about on his website was the Quran itself. And he would write about the contextual and textual integrity of the Quran, its preservation, contradictions and errors that exist in the Quran, theological critiques of Allah he would have, and he would write also about the Quran's relationship with divine Christian doctrine. And so his approach on answering Islam, which I think he may still be semi-active on till today, don't quote me on that one, is not a bunch of random topics, but they're really surgical strikes. His blogs and his posts were these really surgical strikes at the foundations of Islam. And the primary method he would use, that he still uses till today in his verbal debates, is using the sources of Islam against Islamic and Muslim claims. And so Sam exists in this unique paradox of expertise where he only has a high school equivalency, his GED, yet he often stumps and defeats PhD scholars in debates. And this demonstrates a tension that exists today on a broader scale. The tension between formal credentials versus demonstrable knowledge, knowledge that you can demonstrate. Because Sam Shamoun often will quote the Bible off the top of his head without even referring to it, and he has an extensive mental knowledge base of the Bible. And many of his viewers find this highly impressive. And his critics, because of his lack of a formal education, might sometimes refer to him as a charlatan, but his supporters who see this often marvel at his knowledge and praise him for having extreme knowledge. And this tells us a little bit of something about authority in the internet age, where there seems to be a shift in what people consider to be credible, where in the past there seemed to be a lot more credence and credibility ascribed to people who went out and went ahead and got formal degrees and formal accreditations. But nowadays, more and more, we come to find that the more that someone can demonstrate their knowledge directly and demonstrate their ability to engage in debate and argumentation is in itself often perceived as credible. And this change might be a change that occurred to the internet because it democratized access where many people can now have a voice that didn't have a voice before. And so people who might have been very knowledgeable in the past who weren't credentialed might not have had an opportunity to speak and demonstrate their knowledge. But now with the internet, that seems to be more and more the case. And so let's talk about Sam's search for truth, where after being born in the Assyrian Church of the East, he then became a Protestant, a Calvinist in particular. And this is when he started his apologetics. And this phase in Sam's apologetic career is sometimes referred to as the period in which he was very nice and calm to Muslims. And he was gentle in his tone. After that, he had a very brief return to the Assyrian Church of the East that didn't last very long. And he is said to have had a conflict with this ancient church, although there was not much information I could find publicly about this conflict. And now his current position as a Christian is that of a Catholic. Sam's a Catholic, but he considers all of the apostolic churches to have valid sacraments. Now, which churches would Sam Shamoun consider apostolic? Sam Shamoun is talking about the Assyrian Church of the East, from which he comes from which his heritage is. He's talking about the Eastern Orthodox communion of churches. He's talking about the Oriental Orthodox communion of churches. And of course, he's talking about Roman Catholicism. And Sam says that all of these ancient churches have apostolic roots. And because they have apostolic roots, he thinks that they are all valid. And he is not really active in trying to engage in debate between these apostolic churches, but rather often encourages some of his viewers to inquire into something like, for example, Eastern Orthodoxy, if that's what they're interested in inquiring into, even though he himself is a Roman Catholic, because he would consider the Eastern Orthodox Church to be valid in his worldview. And so the pattern with Sam, the pattern that seems to emerge, is that he is always seeking the fullness of the Christian faith and in Christian tradition. And he is always learning more and more about the differences between what he considers to be the apostolic churches. And he is trying to often discern which one of these really has the fullness. And right now, he would say they all do. But that may or may not change in the future. And so a sort of stylistic arc emerges with Sam, where his early reputation was that where he's very nice and he's very calm and he's very gentle. But then as time went on, he became a bit more what people might consider to be aggressive or hostile in his approach. And so what changed? And here I will depart for a brief moment from reporting facts to talking about my opinion. And it is my opinion that the thing that changed from Sam Shamoun is that he felt it necessary to kind of turn up the heat in his approach to combat bad faith actors in debate. Because when you're writing on a blog, you don't have the same sort of rhetorical techniques that might occur in a live debate. But the more he engaged with those, and the more experience he had doing them, the more he encountered people who he might consider to be acting, in very bad faith and in using what he might perceive to be dirty tactics. And because that's the case, I think he also figured that it would be effective for him to turn up the heat in his apologetics. And so what are some of the insults that Sam is often criticized for using? What is it that he says that many Christians don't like hearing? He will say things like, and I quote, demon-possessed prophet, filthy demon, snake, liar, coward, dogs, sons of Satan, and he will use the W word, which refers to a female prostitute. And lately he's been using this phrase called manifesting. He will say that one of his opponents or one of his viewers might be manifesting. Now, what does that mean? Honestly, I don't know. I could see it meaning that their true personality is manifesting itself and the mask is coming off and they're showing themselves to be who they really are inside. Or it could mean that a demon is manifesting within them. I'm not sure what he means when he uses this rhetoric, but he will often accuse people of manifesting. Now, some of his supporters do defend him in this perceived aggression. And they will say things like, well, modern Christianity is way too soft. The scripture itself, they will say, calls for truth, not excessive empathy. And there are claims that Sam's approach has a biblical backing. And some people might appeal to the Bible, and they will quote scripture and say that Paul himself in the New Testament wasn't hesitant in confronting Peter. And they will make appeals about Jesus as well. And they will say that Jesus himself often would call people hypocrites, and he would chase out the money changers with a whip. And they would mention how Jesus would tell some people blankly to their face that their father is the devil. But then, of course, this is met with some pushback. Some people will ask, well, is this really Christ-like? Well, shouldn't we be kind? Isn't kindness one of the fruits of the Spirit? Is Sam really representing what it means to live the Christian faith and having a Christian temperament? And this is an ongoing tension. And so let's talk about the actual results. What are the fruits that we see of Sam Shamoun's approach to apologetics and polemics? Well, Sam is, of course, credited with many Muslim conversions, and some Muslims will say that he has helped them convert to Christianity. Now, I am of the opinion that arguing with a Muslim who is not open to the idea of there being any religion other than Islam is kind of a futile effort. But there are sometimes Muslims who already have doubts, who are already inquiring about Christianity and curious about Christianity. And it is these people who are less interested in aggressive tension and conflict with Christians, but rather are interested in learning the truth, who actually have a potential of converting. It's very much like the parable of the sowers in the Bible, where Jesus says a farmer, he took some seeds and he threw seeds, and some fell on thorny ground and some fell on ground, and then they were later picked up and eaten by birds. But some of the seeds fell on fertile soil. And in the same way, this is how I see a lot of apologetics and polemics affecting people in the real world. It requires an initial desire in someone's heart before they might have an interest in apologetics. And so Sam is credited with facilitating some of these Muslim conversions. But there are also some people online in some forums who will accuse him of driving them away from Christianity because of what they perceive to be his hostility or his aggression. And there is a Muslim apologist known as Ijaz, who also writes online and appears online sometimes. And he will make claims that Sam Shamoun is actually helping in Islamic evangelism by making Christians look bad because of his approach. And sometimes these detractors will also say things like, they will point out the fact that he doesn't have a GED, but their scholars have all these credentials. And so why would you listen to someone with a GED? These are the sort of things that his Muslim detractors will say about him. Now, some of the big questions that arise surrounding the story of Sam Shamoun are, can you be effective in the current landscape of online apologetics without being aggressive and without being what might be perceived as hostility? Is it effective? Or is this something that's needed as a return to form to Christianity before it became quote unquote too soft in modern times? And if it is effective, does it justify the method? Does the end justify the means? Also, this begs the question, is winning arguments important, even if it alienates some inquirers? Is it still important to win the argument? And this goes to show us how the internet really has created a change in discourse around religion, and how there used to be a sort of authority that existed a lot more with traditional academic institutions, universities, seminars, and people who are being pumped out of these institutions. And nowadays, you actually see a lot more apologists, polemicists, and charismatic theologians who will appear online and no one even questions or asks or cares about their background. And it's all a matter of, how good are you at making a claim? Is your claim robust? And are you competent and capable in defending your faith? So things have become a lot more meritocratic now with the dissemination of information on the internet. And so now we move on to the denominational quest that Sam Shamoun has been on. He's been through quite a few denominations, and he seems to have been searching for ultimate truth. So why this constant movement between churches? Well, my opinion on this is that Sam is trying to always find the fullness. He will call it the fullness of the truth. What's most true? And he seems to have always been concerned about this, considering his history from when he was a young kid, being born into the Assyrian Church of the East, having his encounter with the Catholic lady, dealing with that Muslim boy, seeking and inquiring into Islam, and then converting to Protestantism, and then going from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism, which I must note also, this was not an easy transition for Sam, because by the time that Sam Shamoun was a Protestant, he was already a public figure. And so for a public figure who is known for apologetics to convert from one Christian denomination to another will inevitably alienate some of his current existing base. And so it takes courage. You can respect someone who will take a hit to, or at least a temporary hit to their reputation or how they're perceived, and might annoy some of his followers in the pursuit of truth. And it's because of the ways that he sometimes will go against the incentives put in place, the financial incentives, the reputational incentives, that I truly do believe that he really is a seeker of the truth. And his current position is, although he's a Catholic, he has a great respect and admiration for Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, and the Assyrian Church of the East. And so this begs the question, is Sam at the end of his journey? Or may he eventually one day convert to Orthodoxy? Time will tell. And so what we learned is that on the internet, success in apologetics and success in helping facilitate the conversion of Muslims can often coexist with controversy. And Sam's story shows us how a personal history really shapes the apologetics that someone might engage in publicly, and how everyone's unique background kind of gives them a unique perspective and something unique to offer in the space of theology, apologetics, and polemics. Now, back to that lingering question. Does uncompromising truth-telling automatically imply an inevitability for aggression? If someone is uncompromisingly trying to tell the truth, does this mean that eventually they will have to be hostile, they'll have to be aggressive, and they will have to behave in these sort of manners? That's up for you to decide. Sam Shamoun represents the future of religious authority in a digital age, similar to other apologists. He represents this movement towards people who are praised or appreciated based on their merit and not necessarily their credentials. And he demonstrates this shift between respecting academic knowledge and academic credentials to knowledge that you can demonstrate. So here's the challenge. How are traditional institutions going to adapt to this? How are churches going to adapt to this? How are universities going to adapt to this? How are seminaries going to adapt to this? And that's still to be seen. So a few questions for you before I leave. Maybe you could answer in the comments. Number one, is there a place for aggression, or some might even perceive it to be passion, deep passion, in apologetics? Second question, what makes evangelism truly effective in the modern age, as well as how is it effective throughout time? Timeless effectiveness. And the third question is, how do we balance the truth with being loving to our neighbor and being loving to all of the humans, all our fellow humans? And so the paradox of Sam, love him or hate him, you can't ignore him.